Mike and Mikey today. I reached out to the most AI literate guy that I know because I want to share how AI illiterate I have finally determined I am for today's Not So Critical update. All right. So I don't know if I don't know how to acknowledge this, but the show's been a little quiet recently.
I noticed that.
So still having a hard time getting back into a groove, but I had a really interesting experience over this past couple weeks working with ChatGPT for the first time on a programming project. And I know you, Mikey, Mr. Road to CISO on the socials, have done a lot of work with AI for content generation, get some feedback from you on other stuff. So I'm going to share with you my experience, and you're either going to say, yeah, welcome to the party, you're 2 years late, or you're still doing it wrong, you're an idiot, or wow, you're a genius. We never thought of it that way before. And I...
Who is we?
What's your prediction? So do you want to share a little bit about how you've used AI, just so we know going in?
Yeah, sure. So I have used many different flavors of what we call AI. I know it's Gen AI, generative AI, generating images, audio, video, text, obviously. I've used a lot of those offerings from various avenues, different models, locally hosted, open source, closed source, proprietary. I've had like the free account on things. I've had paid API connections. I've tried a lot of them. Obviously, there's way too many to even try. But I found myself probably almost 2 years ago, probably a year and a half or so ago, using ChatGPT mostly to make shortcut, my writing capabilities. I wouldn't call myself a very good writer. And just doing that, kind of playing around with it, I would say I got pretty proficient in getting it to output what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Whether it be like research or maybe a plan for work, or maybe, just a bedtime story for my son, things like that. And then I kind of went to the next level of, okay, this is great, but I still have to interact a lot with this chat interface. How can I then automate that?
Yeah.
Now you go.
Well, I just made a note because I want to at the very end touch on this idea of regurgitation, content regurgitation versus content creation. But I won't make you get into that right now. We'll come back to that. So you can continue.
Well, my automation path. So I have a lot of posting to do with my hashtag Road to CISO professional persona,
which everybody should check out.
Yep, check me out on the socials. You can find me almost anywhere. We were just naming all the platforms, and yeah, I think I have an account on almost all of them as Road to CISO, CISO. I was wanting to post daily or at least weekly, and along with like a theme. So I kind of had the themes kind of outlined, it was very high level. And then I wrote some Python, which is not a strong suit of mine. I've done programming before, mostly PHP, like a while back, done a lot of bash scripting. So I was like, okay, well, Python is apparently the language of AI. So maybe I can cobble together some Python scripting to help me, write potentially thousands of social media posts or blog posts. And it actually ended up working. I copy pasted a lot from ChatGPT, did a little perplexity in there for research. So I have this script. This is about a year ago now that I had this script created, a series of Python scripts that I would give it one topic, cybersecurity, let's say. And then it would kind of spin off as many subtopics as I asked for, 20 to 30, maybe 50. And then it would go through and write social media posts for each of those. It would write LinkedIn posts, Twitter, Instagram. I'm doing this. So I'm like, this is working pretty good, but I need some images. How do I do that? So that got me down this road of, image creation. And again, like I found that Midjourney was probably the best image generator there was. And if you do it a certain way, it would, create an image that I was like, this would be perfect for my post on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. But then how do I automate that? Because I can't do that 1,000 times. So I threw that into the script. And if you're listening, maybe you know that Midjourney does not have an API that is open to the world, but they do have Discord, or they still use Discord, started in Discord. Now they have a website that you can use. So you can create a Discord bot that can do things on your behalf, like add comments or, submit Discord queries. Anyway, I went down this whole hosting there's a project, I think it's called imagineapi.dev is their website. So you can host that, which then can tie into Discord, the Discord version of Midjourney, and you can automate the creation of images. So
and
now I've got this
you did all this with GPT.
Basically.
Like when you talk about I automated it, you're saying you use GPT to create the scripts to automate it.
Exactly.
Right,
so
okay.
I asked ChatGPT, like, I want to do this, and it would give me some information. Give me the actual files. I would start it off with just copying and pasting them straight up, and seeing where the errors were, pasting those errors back into ChatGPT, and over this probably went on for in my free time, which is very limited, for several months. But at the end of maybe 6 months, it was working. Like, it actually worked. I can do this with a command line with 1,000 blog posts, with companion social media posts, with imagery, and I can tweak it. There's a bunch of different configurations that I put in, like maybe the coloring of the images needs to be a certain way to match a brand, that type of stuff. There's all this stuff that I can tweak depending on the brand that I need to automate. So that was working, and I kind of accidentally learned a lot about Python by copy pasting back and forth between ChatGPT, because by the end of the 6 months, it would tell me, this would be a good update to this script in this way. And I would look at it and I would put it, off to the side as like a difference between what I had and what it was suggesting, and would see the errors that it was coming out with, which did happen frequently. You have to be really careful with copying and pasting code from the internet, and ChatGPT,
really,
and all the others. they tend to make things up, hallucinations they call them. But yes, definitely true. But by the end of this experiment, I can almost write Python.
Yeah, so that's pretty much exactly what I wanted to talk about today, because one could be led to believe from watching YouTube that if you have an idea, you could just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, code this up for me. And then step 3 is profit, right? I'm done. What else is there? That was not my experience. But it sounds like we had a similar path. So over this past couple of weeks, we had a Christmas break sometime between Christmas and New Year's. And I had wanted to start on a project I'd started a while ago that was actually like a MERN stack, MongoDB, Node.js, and React. And I had forgotten everything. So this was actually a COVID project that I started in 2020. Forgot everything about it and thought I'd come back and pick it up again. Couldn't figure out how to set up the environment. Spent 2 days on it. Went to GPT and like, dude, just hook this up for me. It took like 2 hours and I was up and running. That led me kind of back. And once I saw how easy that was, I started thinking, wow, maybe everything's this easy. So one idea that I've had is after the election, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we had a presidential election here in the United States.
Oh, that's right. I remember.
Yeah. The eve of the election was the last time I watched a YouTube video or read an article about politics. And
I'm done.
I tapped out and have never been happier. But I did start feeling very like uninformed about the world. So my idea was that I wanted to scrape all these news articles from reputable sources, feed it into GPT, and have GPT summarize the news for me, stripping out all the commentary, stripping out all the opinion. Just tell me what's happening. What do I need to know? And so my thought was, I'll write a script that scrapes the content, feed in GPT, just like I described. So I went to GPT and said, hey, this is what I want to do. How do we get started? And it laid out a beautiful project plan. I was blown away. So then I did exactly like you described. Hey, write me a script that will scrape these headlines. Take that script, write the, scrape the articles. And I think what I would say is overall, I found it to be very helpful, very much like you described. I have, like you, strong background in PHP programming, not a lot of experience with Python, but some. Very strong understanding of control structures and general programming principles and programming logic. And the thing that surprised me the most was, well, the combination of how fast it was, but also, like you said, how much babysitting it needed. Because it would, I'd say like, oh, hey, this error come up. How do we troubleshoot that? And say, well, I think we should focus on this. And I'd very often have to go back and say, maybe we should focus on this. And it would say, oh yeah, you're right. Let's do that. And then it was fine, but took a lot of management. And I think my ultimate takeaway was that it was like working with a very ADHD genius teenager, because it took so much redirection. And that's kind of, it sounded like that's what you were describing too, right?
Yeah, it totally will just take your suggestion and be like, oh, that's gospel. Absolutely. Let's do that. And you're like, well, wait, I was kind of asking you.
Well, so I found that if I would say, here's what I'm thinking, can you make some suggestions? Or what are some alternatives? Or how would you do this? That it would end up providing very good feedback. It was great for brainstorming.
Yeah, that's actually what I found too, is that you have to take a step back from writing code every now and then. And ChatGPT and Anthropic are both really good because they kind of keep everything in context that you've been chatting about. So it has an idea, but remember, it's only just a very cursory glance at what you've spoken about for the last 6 months in my case. And then you come back with I'm thinking about this. And then you have like a planning session in the middle of the same chat where you've been coding, so to speak.
Yes. So this is where I started running into trouble, because I ran into a situation where GPT would keep reintroducing the same bug over and over again. And I would say, no, you brought this back. And it would say, you're right, let me fix that. But then it would do it again and again. So GPT and I ended up getting into this extensive conversation about how does it remember things, and what does it mean for it to learn or know something, and how does it keep track of these things? And what it led me to, it was a genuinely interesting conversation, but there was always still a part of me thinking like, okay, so now is this actually telling me how it understands it works? Because it's still just a word guessing engine, right? Or is it just kind of saying what it thinks I want to hear? I've been able to validate some of it, but the main, and I think this is the right track. So what I ended up putting together is that it suggested that we generate a, what did they call it? It called it a working guidelines document, where we laid out, every time we do a codes change, we're going to commit it to short-term memory. We're going to keep a change log. If I ask it to remind me about something, it's going to do it on a certain, at the beginning of each session. And what I realized is that it was essentially, if you're doing the API programming, what they call the system instructions. So, and then the other thing it told me is that as we have this conversation, it keeps this context going. but it's very driven by recency. So where you talked about like jumping around, one thing I noticed is we'd be working on a page, code, and then I would say the working guidelines we developed said we're supposed to do it this way. Let's revisit that. And we talk about the working guidelines for a little. And I'd say, cool, now apply this to the code. But it would actually then try to write code into the working guidelines document. And I said, why are you doing that? And it said, oh, sorry, I'll focus on this now. And I came to realize this idea of like focus on this now is kind of a specific command where I could say like
keyword.
Yeah. And, forget about everything we were just talking about, but focus on this. And that kind of stopped it from making the mistake. So it really did walk me through putting together this series of like the working guidelines document. We generated what it called, it named this. I still don't totally understand it, but it called it a demonstration diff process. Yeah. Where if I asked her for a change, it would highlight what it's going to change. Here's the new code. This is why we did it. Super, super helpful. But I had to remind it constantly. Remember the change process. We're going to focus on this now. Do this. And it would do it great. But it really was this very iterative process of like forcing it to stay in. And you mentioned like jumping around topics. That really seemed to confuse it. And the other thing that I came away with is it has a very strong recency bias. So if we spent too long talking about the process side, then it would conflate the two. And we'd have to really do that reset and say, okay, focus on this now.
I feel like we're about to get to the tips section because I have some tips based on what you were just saying. Yeah,
no, go ahead. I mean, this is kind of the point because like I said, if you watch YouTube, you could come away with the impression that you just like ask GPT, step 2, question mark, step 3, profit. But exactly. This stuff ended up being really important. So what are your tips?
Ooh, so if we're going to do all the tips, I would say the very first one, and you mentioned this, is start with a plan and have it go into, have this very lengthy conversation about what you want to build. And depending on how complicated what you want to build is how long this conversation needs to be. So start with, I want to build X. What do you think? And blah, 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 blah. And they'll, go back and forth and kind of refine the idea, just the idea. And then go into the technical specifications. So like you said, you wanted to use the MERN stack. I was using Python, Fast API, and an SQLite database. And I wanted to graft on a Vue.js front end. So this is what after we outlined what I really wanted to build, because, after I built the thing that I built, I wanted to make it better. It's like the programmer's dilemma, I guess. I can refactor this and make it better this way and more modular and use it in different places and different ways. But what I had built was like very procedural. This happens, then this happens. It was very elementary. So as I go into this like refactor, I started with this plan. And then the idea was kind of cemented. Then the technical specifications were cemented. And then I said, okay, now use the idea and the tech specs to make a comprehensive plan. And then I copied that. I created a Git repo and I made that like a README file. And then I went into I started a new chat with ChatGPT and said, I want to build this and paste in that spec. And during my previous exploration, whenever I would get to something and it would kind of repeat the same bug over and over again, like it was in a loop and I was too ignorant, too dumb to figure out what was actually wrong. And, the internet was not helpful. Nothing was working. So I would take that problem or that file and also create a new thread, chat.
That's a good idea.
And say, hey, I have this file that does X, Y, and Z. I want to make it do R.
Some idiot made this mistake.
Yeah, some idiot.
How would you fix this?
ChatGPT made this mistake, and we can't get out of this loop. And I would go fix that problem elsewhere, or I would even use it in a different LLM altogether. Like I'd jump over to Claude or something
Mhm.
and try to figure it out that way. And that was very helpful. And then bringing it back in, uh, kind of continued on our
Yeah.
progression. What was I going to say? One thing I did find out. So this is at my work. So I do a lot of things like I start with ideation in ChatGPT to have like a help or to brainstorm. And I would talk to it about a project I want to do or that I'm, supposed to do at work. And I would do it, every other day I would have a conversation with it about different things that I had to do at work. And then one day we came to like, Q3 planning or Q4 planning. And I was like, hey, ChatGPT, I need to make a plan for Q4. How should I describe it? And I had been talking about it in other threads with ChatGPT, and it was like, how about this, and this, and this thing that you've been talking about in other threads? And I was like, holy s, you're spying on us.
It's still within one session, right? Like it's within one chat.
No.
Oh, I didn't think it could see across chats.
Exactly.
Oh.
I didn't either. But now I know that it can, which also influences what you're trying to do now. Like you almost need a whole new ChatGPT account, maybe.
Yeah,
in some cases to divorce yourself from what you've been talking about.
So, so you set up, the first thing you would do is have this conversation about the requirements. Having gone through this process now once, the first thing I would do next time is actually introduce our working guidelines at the very beginning of the create the system instructions. Say like, for as long as we're having this conversation, these are the rules we're going to follow. And when I say this, it means this, and you're going to do that. And that my main thing that I've learned, I think, in this experience is that it will accept those instructions, and that will carry the things I learned from this experience will carry over into future experiences, because I'll still expect to relate to it in the same way. And so one thing that comes to mind is I tell it, hey, I'm going to wrap up for the day, but when we pick up again, remind me about X, Y, and Z. So in our working guidelines, there's a specific instruction for the phrase when we pick up again. And its instruction is then to recap the working guidelines, handle this reminder, review the demonstration diff process. I don't know why I called it that.
You're like, whatever, we'll go with it.
But it helps to reestablish the context. It reminds me where we left off. And it brings those things back into the short-term context or recency weight of the interaction. So I agree with everything you said. Yeah.
Well, that's a great tip for any LLM usage, is that you really need to set the stage. Tell the LLM who you expect it to be. So like if you're writing a social media post, you're like, you are an SEO expert and you write in this way and use this type of information. You do in-depth conversations to get research, and like you really have to set the stage initially to get good outcomes.
Yeah, I was doing that also. I'd heard that tip. One thing that I got really frustrated with is so my idea was that I needed to scrape all these articles and then push them into GPT. But then it kind of occurred to me, well, I think GPT has access to the internet now, right? Can't I just tell it, show me all the headlines from the past day? And I got caught in this super frustrating loop of it would do it, but all the citations it was giving me were wrong. And what I finally figured out is that it was telling me true stories, but it was actually making up the citation URL.
Yeah.
And I could not figure out how to make it stop doing that.
But you were writing, your code was essentially like a RAG system. Do you understand what RAG is?
This was a separate approach. This wasn't the scraping.
I gotcha.
Does that change what you were going to say?
No. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the RAG system?
It stands for like retrieval augmentation, something or other. But anyway, it's giving the LLM assets to use in conjunction with its conversation with you.
Yeah, so I was trying to take a different approach. I was trying to take a different approach where I wasn't going to give it those assets. I was just going to say, go to New York Times, go to Fox News, go to whatever, go to these 10 sites, look at all the current events of the day, and just summarize them with the citations, which it would do, except the citations it gave me were garbage, which was very confusing to me. Because how is it collecting the right answer, but then not telling me where it got that answer? I wasn't able to get past that with it.
Then this is in a chat session.
Yes, in a chat session.
Yeah, I haven't had good luck with it giving me citations.
Yeah, it was a very odd experience.
It a citation, it can summarize or glean information from that sort of thing. I would do that, in the code that I was building.
And then I did go back to the Python because of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the recent things I built, and it's like half done, but I wanted to basically do the same thing. I wanted to scrape, I wanted to do a Google search essentially and summarize the top results and then rank them in order of like impact or virality, things that people were talking about in the news. Yeah. And I wanted to do that across a search engine, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Reddit. So what is based on this one or two, this phrase or this keyword, what is the world, the internet talking about right now? And then take those, summarize them, rank them, join any that are the same and use that as part of its ranking, because if more people are talking about it on different platforms, it means it's more pertinent in the news, essentially. Just like you're talking about, I had a different purpose for the result, which was I wanted to write about it with my social media, whatever persona. But I would do that with Python. I would do the searching and the scraping with Python, and then I would give it to ChatGPT or whatever to summarize.
Yeah, yeah. So long term, potentially, I could write this Python script to scrape the news articles, send it to GPT for analysis, get the summaries back, have GPT turn the summaries into YouTube scripts, create a system that finds the appropriate stock photography, edits it together and uploads it to YouTube, and then just sends me a link to the YouTube video of the top 10 news stories from yesterday, fully edited and ready to go on my YouTube channel that's now monetized. So ultimately that's gonna be the case. But I just really was struck by what an interesting experience was to co-program with GPT like this.
It was very odd, but there was good that came from it for me, at least. Like I learned a lot of things that I didn't know before. So I guess I'm appreciative is a good word for ChatGPT.
It's a really weird feeling, but I would say overall it's a benefit. It got me where I wanted to go, but it was not the path that I expected to take. It required a lot more babysitting than I thought. If I didn't have any programming background, I don't think it would have been possible to get there. So to any software engineers, ChatGPT is not coming from for your job, at least not soon.
No.
So overall, like, yes, definite benefit. I will keep working with it. Knowing some of these things that we talked about, though, is pretty critically important to your success. So if you're somebody who hasn't tried it or is curious about it or hasn't good experience with it, maybe just I don't know, what would your advice to those people be?
Well, I think that the advice to like almost anybody thinking about programming or almost anything is just try it.
Yeah.
And I've always felt like trying to build something that you want is going to motivate you more to like stick with it, because I imagine, like, I've never sat through like computer science classes, and I've never I do. I have read like a programming book or two, but I always find myself skipping around to the part that I need for the job that I'm doing.
Stack Overflow.
Exactly. Yeah, Stack Overflow. Now ChatGPT. Like, just give me. I want to get to the end. But
Yeah.
that is the process of learning. Like, that is just how a lot of us, me specifically, that's how
Yeah.
I learn, by doing things. And now I have multiple skills, which are coding a little bit better than I used to be able to, and using these new generative AI systems to have have more output, and more impact, I would say.
Yeah, I think I'm tempted to say you have to know something about programming to be able to use it effectively. But on the other hand, maybe that's not necessarily true. So if you're trying to do something relatively simple, you say, hey, write me an Excel formula to do this specific kind of manipulation. No problem. Write me a Python script to parse a XML file and turn it into a CSV. Pretty straightforward, no problem. Once you start getting beyond that, though, you're really going to have to guide the troubleshooting in a lot of cases, which is going to require some basic understanding of programming principles, if not experience with the actual language that you're doing the work in.
Well, I mean, that is true right now. However, there are systems out there where you can say, I want to build an app that writes social media posts based on scraping of popular content from news articles in the last 7 days. Like, you can go to places like REPL is one. I think it's called Replit, excuse me.
Yeah,
Replit. There's one called Bolt, Bolt.new. Bolt.new is mostly for UI, even though it can do some kind of back-end-ish things with Node and things. There's also a self-hosted version of Bolt.new, which is called Bolt.diy. These are all systems that are meant to, you give it the idea and it just like kind of spits out the answer. But again, there's going to be, I've tried all of these, there is more babysitting than you expect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it does abstract away the part about knowing how to set up the environment, how to deploy. Like, these things have a deploy button, like doop, like, oh, I'd like to do this. Obviously, you have to pay these. And luckily, you and I have the ability to know how to create the environment and know how to deploy if we wanted to end up doing that. But even if you don't, there are places that you can go that can do this middle portion that we were talking about with ChatGPT copy pasting, and it can give you the environment setup and the deployment like in a click of a button.
I want to keep talking about this. We have already been recording for 30 minutes. I still have 5 things on my outline that I wanted to get to. This may end up being an entire series. I guess I would say I feel somewhat validated. I to some extent felt like I was reinventing the wheel and everyone was just gonna be like, yeah, obviously you should have known that going in. But it feels affirming that you had a similar experience and have gone through some of these same pains that I did and come to the same conclusions, which makes me feel smart. So I like that we got there. And
we got there. And you're right that you don't hear, I've never heard this on YouTube. Like, hey, it's almost as hard as programming. Like, it's not a cakewalk.
Yeah, that's absolutely, exactly. That's true. It's different from programming, right? But it's not just, you don't just say, hey, go do this, and it does it, and you're done. It's a real task. And somebody said this, my brother said this morning, well, that's why prompt engineering is a job. But I think it even goes a little beyond that. Do you disagree? I saw you cock your head a little early.
I just think that critical thinking is the job. And the tools at hand, the tools you use are just based on how motivated you are to get to the output faster.
So most people are just going to be fucked.
You said it. See ya.